Welcome to Season 3 of Swiss Impact with Banerjis. I'm Sveta.
And I'm Ben.
The topic of Season 3 is Impact Investing, the new normal. Do you also want to do something meaningful for our planet and people, or invest with impact?
Then our amazing and powerful guests who are business owners, heads of financial institutions, thought leaders, political leaders, policymakers, investors, and experts.
Greetings, my name is Ash Bachori, and I'm the senior mentor of the POP or Protect Our Planet movement, and also a member of the board and secretary-treasurer of the World Sustainable Development Forum. Our primary goal is to mobilize the 1.8 billion youth of the world to urgently address the issue of climate change and take action to protect our planet.
This will inspire you to get engaged.
And in this season, we will challenge them even more to take actions towards sustainable development goals to enable paradigm shift in the financial sector and way of doing business.
Watch and learn how can we, as humans, transform into eco-financial system which would serve all people and the environment.
We aim for impact investment to become available to anyone, become truly mainstream.
See you every Friday at 3 p.m. Central European Time at Swiss Impact with Banerjee.
Act for your future.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, and to our viewers from Far East. Good night.
Welcome back to week 12 of season 3. Our show is about impact investment. The theme of this season is impact investing, the new normal. To do so, we must shift capital towards true impact, where positive social and environmental changes go along financial return. Of course, impact investing is a force for good and the driving force to achieve sustainable development goals.
Did you know, last week, I was informed by an old friend of mine from Armenia that not only are they watching our shows, but they even started 2 projects, one on the education of children, and they also started a fund for investing in impact investment projects in Armenia. Can you believe it? This really makes a difference.
Wow, of course I believe. And it means that we are indeed succeeding in our objective of raising awareness around the world. And some other good news, maybe you will believe it too, for all non-English speaking countries, they also can watch us soon in their language. At least I can say for sure, for Russia. My mom told me today that a registered YouTube user can actually get synchronized translation, and she finally couldn't understand us 100% what we are talking here about.
So everyone who wants to keep informed and support us in this, please subscribe to the YouTube channel that's called www.youtube.com/Swiss Impact.
Of course, and also the ones who want to learn about profitable business with impact, how to do that. We will conduct 3 more trainings in the next 3 months. Check chamomile.ch and take the opportunity to learn about impact investing and profitable business.
And I forgot to mention, we are also available on podcast and on Smart TV.
Wow, yeah, everywhere soon. Hope people will not say, oh, they're everywhere again. Okay, Ben, but before we invite our guest, would you share a little story, maybe positive or whatever, however it will be today?
No, I'll just summarize a short article I wrote a few days back. I was very utterly shocked when I heard that the Amazon forest destruction or deforestation has increased significantly. In fact, the Brazilian Institute INPE that monitors Amazon from the space last Thursday mentioned that between August 20 to July 2021, the deforestation has speeded up. It has increased with 22% more than the 12 months before that. In fact, under the reign of Bolsonaro, the deforestation has been increasing with double figures percentage each and every year. This, despite of all promises and commitments of Bolsonaro.
For all the viewers' information, when we speak of Amazon, we are speaking of the lungs of the planet Earth. And this is why we have 4 questions to you, to our audience. How long should mankind allow such activities to continue without taking any actions? Should we let leaders like Bolsonaro get away with this because they are democratically chosen?
And isn't it time that the protection of humanity, or for the protection of humanity and planet Earth, the Amazon rainforest should be taken away from Brazil and put under the UN protection. And people like Bolsonaro should be followed up by ICC for crime against humanity.
On that note, let's start with our guest today. Previously, we have discussed the global issues like climate change, loss of biodiversity, inequality, and today we are going to discuss one of my favorite topics, actually, and it is plastic pollution in nature.
So with this, we welcome John Duncan, the initiative lead of WWF, No Plastic in Nature.
Welcome, John.
Thanks,
Great to
Sveta
have
and
you with
Ben.
us today.
Yeah, nice to be involved. Thanks for the invitation.
So so John is he's leading the initiative which brings together a diverse team of people from WWF officers working on solutions to one of the most complex challenges facing our oceans today. John has a background in marine biology. My son wants to go in that direction also, and an interest in sustainability transitions. He previously led WWF's South African Marine Program, where he worked on a broad range of areas ranging from plastic pollution to sustainable seafood and marine spatial planning. I'm very curious to know what that means. He has previously held a seat on the Marine Stewardship Council Developing World Working Group and is a current member of the advisory board for the World Economic Forum's Global Plastic Action Partnership.
Wow, I'm really looking forward to have cool interview with you today, John, because you have so much to tell us, I'm sure, on the plastic pollution today.
So we start with then the policies and treaties. So John, you are a South African now living in Switzerland. You have had an amazing history till now. From a very difficult and controversial topic like sustainable fishing, you moved to No Plastic in Nature initiative of WWF. Despite of these two seemingly impossible and unsurmountable issues, you still call yourself environmental optimist. Why?
It's a good question, Ben, but I think a couple of reasons. I think, to be honest, I'm also a parent. I've got two daughters, and I kind of don't see any alternative to optimism. I think it's really important that, we do think positively and optimistically about the future, for the sake of our children. And, and I've never been inspired by someone who's not optimistic, and I think there's always two ways to interpret something, kind of challenge or opportunity, and we have a lot of challenges on the planet at the moment, but I don't think anyone is motivated to change on the basis of hearing how challenging something is. They're motivated to change because they hear about someone doing something about it, and it's our job to be inspirational to the kind of next generations. So I think that's hopefully why I'm optimistic, because I don't see any alternative, and it's important. And I think, interestingly enough, when you talk about the difference between fishing and plastic, sustainable fisheries is a bit of my history in a sense, and it's a challenging topic because you're always balancing off people's needs, in terms of fishing communities and the need for protein versus the ecological needs to try and keep as many ecosystems intact and keep as much fish in the ecosystem. And so it was often a really challenging thing. You had to kind of people versus nature in some sense. But I think with plastic pollution, it's actually more simple, where kind of most people, everyone is aligned. No one wants to see plastic in nature, and so there's a lot more momentum behind kind of trying to fix the problem, and it's not as the trade-offs aren't as difficult. That's why I'm optimistic about plastic pollution as well.
Well, I'm also optimistic. So we are in the same boat, John. Can you please tell our audience of WWF, what do you do and how exactly? So a little bit more of the background, and also please tell us about the activities and mandate of your initiative with the name No Plastic in Nature initiative. Yes.
Sure. I mean, I think at a high level, WWF is one of the world's largest conservation organizations with over 6,000 different employees working in over 100 countries around the world. And that's on a very wide range of topics, including obviously plastic pollution. Within the plastic pollution space, the No Plastics in Nature initiative is focusing really on kind of 3 key areas, and that is working with businesses to try and help them understand what their plastic footprint is, and recognizing actually that that's not as simple as you might think. For some of these large multinational companies who are active in also 100 or 200 countries around the world, understanding what you're putting onto the market and how each of those different markets manage that like the end of life waste is actually quite challenging, because a ton of PET waste in Thailand is a very different story to a ton of PET waste in Switzerland. And so you got to understand that a footprint does really depend on what that kind of fate is in each of the different countries. Then we also work very actively on policy. And that's kind of one of the key pillars. I think that if you don't have policy supporting a lot of this work, you're ultimately going to have a very short-term impact. And policy has to underpin the kind of long-term direction, both from a kind of environmental perspective, but also kind of financial sustainability. And then the last piece is working with cities through our Plastic Smart Cities initiative, where recognizing that we try as hard as we can in WWF to work upstream as much as possible, because that's where the long-term solutions lie, preventing waste from ever entering the environment. But in some cases, particularly in places like Southeast Asia right now, the challenge with waste management is acute. And that's where some of the highest kind of leakage is happening at this point in time. So we are working with some of the cities in Southeast Asia to try and help work through kind of what a sustainable waste management system should look like.
Yeah. No, before I go to the next question, I wanted to ask, what do you mean by upstream for our audience?
It's a good question, Ben. I think many people are kind of aware of the analogy when it comes to plastic pollution of upstream and downstream, in the sense that the example always used is if you walk into your bathroom and someone's left the tap running and the sink is overflowed and the water is flowing onto the floor and all around. The question is, do you start mopping the floor first, or do you turn off the tap first? And I think that hopefully the obvious answer. The answer is obvious.
You never know. Once you face these situations, then you will know what you did first.
No, it's a very old Dutch saying. In Dutch saying, it says that don't wipe the floor, turn off the tap. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the upstream solutions are trying to turn off the tap. So those are things looking at the production of the plastic, the design, something you can either reduce the amount of plastic being put onto the system, or ensure that you are recirculating the kind of important plastic within the system through either reuse or recycling. The kind of the downstream problems are what to do with it once it's become waste. And I think in WWF, we kind of believe that something's already gone badly wrong when plastic has arrived in the environment. Trying to pull it out of the environment is really not a long-term solution.
Yeah, exactly. And because you mentioned policies, and maybe you can give us a peek in your back office. So when you say policies, what do you mean by them? How do you put them together? To whom do you present it? And who are the kind of your stakeholders? So how do you properly see to it that the policies are implemented?
Yeah, this is the
Let's
challenge.
try not to be too political here, right?
Policies.
I mean, I think there's obviously multiple layers of policy work, and starting right at the top, which is actually one of the big focus areas of our work within the No Plastics in Nature initiative, looking at international kind of regulations. And this is international treaties and agreements around how we manage plastic pollution. And interestingly enough, plastic pollution is clearly a global pollutant, but it's pretty much the only global pollutant which doesn't have an international agreement regulating its use. And so that's one of the things that we are advocating for very strongly at the moment, and that's an opportunity coming up at UNEA, the United Nations Environmental Assembly, next year in February, where there's a resolution on the table for the UN member states to agree to start negotiating a treaty on plastic pollution. And already we've got almost 3/4 of UN member states agree that there is a need for such a treaty. So, and that treaty will help agree on a whole lot of things, how we measure plastic pollution, and how we can harmonize kind of responses to it, because at the moment everyone's doing their own thing, which may work in one country but actually cause more problems in another country. So standardizing certain regulations across the world, and then also creating kind of a mandate for nations to report against progress in terms of stemming the leakage of plastic into the environment. And so that's kind of at an international level, that policy piece. Then next level down is obviously your national policy, where independent states have to figure out how they can actually address kind of plastic pollution within their own borders. And again, each country has a very different waste infrastructure kind of setup, and different underlying characteristics. So policies will differ from one country to the next. But some of these policies look at how you finance waste management, for example, and that's where policy tools like extended producer responsibility come in. Or even, some countries have just banned certain types of really problematic plastic. And then
how many countries ban plastic by now? Do you know them by heart?
The simple answer, Svet, is none. No one can ban plastic. I think this is really the challenge with plastic, is that I think the ambition to get rid of plastic altogether is not really realistic, and probably not desirable. Many applications of plastic are really important because they help protect human lives in the case of COVID, and they help preserve food and reduce food waste, for example, in certain forms of packaging. So we have to recognize that they are necessary forms of plastic, but at the moment there's a lot of unnecessary plastic out there, and that the kind of recycling and reuse systems to help ensure that those necessary plastics don't leak out of the system are not in place. So I think when you ask who's banned plastic, there are the bans that we've seen to date are really around certain kind of singular objects. So you might see like coffee stirrers, or you'll see in the EU, for example, now it should be quite difficult to find a plastic straw, for example, because that has now been banned. But I think you'll still struggle to find in anywhere in the world an individual who doesn't touch plastic on a daily basis.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on this. It is, especially if you're as old as me, then you will know. When I was
not that old. Come on.
When I was a young kid in India, people drank tea in mud or clay cups. You drank the tea in the train, railway stations, or whatever, and you threw it away, and it broke, and it just disappeared in the soil. Today, everybody is using plastic cup. So when you go on the train, the side of the train line tracks are collection of plastic. You can't believe how horrible that is. So it is not a very old thing. It has permeated our life quite in the last 2 decades maximum. A lot of these things, and that's what I think you said correctly, the necessary and unnecessary plastic. And this I certainly consider as an unnecessary one. What is happening now in India, that it is so full of plastic everywhere that even the cows and the birds are eating it.
Yep, absolutely.
That's really dramatic. But let me ask you the following question, because we know that we are producing nearly 400 million tons of plastic annually. And also rich countries consume more plastic per person, but due to their more efficient waste management processes, it is actually the poorer countries which have become the source of majority of plastic ending up in the nature, like Ben said, or also in the oceans, of course. And during our previous meeting, you had mentioned the same. Can you then explain what does waste management mean for your initiative, and how and why do you think that impact investors among our audience can get involved and solve or help solving this issue?
Yes, that's an important issue, and I think also something that will be tackled under that kind of global agreement, hopefully. But I think what's really important to understand is that we don't want to create this kind of dichotomy of developing nations being the cause of the problem, and it's not a it's not solely a waste management problem. And I think that that's really important to understand, because the waste management, going back to my earlier analogy, is kind of like, the downstream solution here. Like if we just manage the waste better, then we'll have less plastic leaking out into the environment. But we're ignoring the fact then that plastic is made of fossil fuel, for example, which is contributing to the climate problem. And actually, I think now is a good time. If you could just maybe bring up the slides, I wanted to share with your audience what the kind of key challenges are with plastic pollution, because I think we often see it through quite a narrow lens. So I think everyone knows that plastic is associated with kind of marine pollution, and you can see from the picture here, plastic in coral reefs, and many marine species, over 700 of them, are known to be impacted by plastic ingestion. But the interesting thing, I think, that is often ignored, is it's not just biodiversity or marine biodiversity that's impacted. Plastic has a significant climate impact too. And this is not just also in terms of production, but also across its whole life cycle. So many countries, including Switzerland, for example, incinerate most of the waste, and most of the plastic ends up in another form of pollution in our atmosphere. So the estimations are that between 10 and 13% of the kind of global greenhouse gas budget, essentially, by 2050 could be used up by plastic production, which is why it's not simply address waste management in the developing world. We've got to look at this a bit more holistically. The other thing I think that we also need to recognize is that plastic pollution has massive economic costs, which are again this challenge between developed and developing world, where most of the plastic is produced or developed in the developing world, and the big companies who are selling it tend to be based in the developed world. But the countries that are often end up having to try and manage the waste at the end of life are typically in the developing world. And there are massive costs associated with trying to manage it. So you've got companies who aren't paying the full price of these products, benefiting or profiting off the use of plastic, while developing world economies are kind of expected to pay the waste management costs, which obviously is also not appropriate. And that's where tools like extended producer responsibility come in, which I mentioned earlier. This picture, out of interest, is actually in Indonesia, and this is a normal beach.
That looks horrible. I always, when I see that, it's like, oh my gosh,
And this is, I mean, these are the impacts. I mean, you can see there's a fire burning in the background, sometimes which they start spontaneously, or other times they will be lit intentionally to get rid of the plastic. But obviously you've got communities living, you can see their houses right there as well, who then get all of the toxic fumes. And this is actually a fishing community. So you can see their fishing boats there, and you can imagine the impact that this plastic has on their ability to fish and catch anything in the ocean. So highlighting that it's not just the economic costs of plastic pollution are also quite significant, and this is where it's coming from. To your question of developing. 75% of plastic leakage in the ocean comes from uncollected waste, and I think that so yes, this uncollected waste is typically coming from a developing world country. People who live in the developed world can't connect with this, because they understand their understanding of waste is they put their garbage bin outside their house on a one day of the week, and someone collects it and takes it away, and they never think about it again. But that privilege is not afforded to a large majority of people living in this world, and they have to get rid of those products somewhere. So the environment is pretty much the only option. There's no alternative. It's not a person choosing to do something, be a bad person and litter it because they could have put it in the dustbin. The dustbin does not get collected. And again, this comes back to the question of whose responsibility is that these people are being sold products that they can't do anything with other than litter it into the environment. So it's important to understand this kind of, I suppose, multitude of challenges that plastic pollution is creating, and recognize that waste management is not the only solution here. We need to be looking upstream to reduce the amount of plastic that's produced and make sure that those systems exist for both developed and developing world countries that actually ensure that someone has somewhere to put these products once they've used them for the first time.
Yeah. And isn't this an issue that I imagine that you can gain more if the large multinationals will convert or adapt your policies than the smaller companies? Or am I wrong, and the smaller companies can contribute also?
It's a good question, Ben. Maybe you can shift the slides away. But I mean, I think when you look at the balance, it's tricky. I think this is probably the same with many environmental challenges. I think a lot of people look to the large multinationals to take leadership on the issue, and which I think they rightly should do. And I think that they are often the most outspoken about things that like trying to take a lead. But I don't think that well, I think that we need to hold those big companies accountable, and we do want to see more action from some of those big companies who are often kind of highlighted as the worst polluters in the world. But in each individual country, you'll have these multinationals that may take up 30, 40, 50% of the products, but the other 50% is often smaller or national companies who are often, in a sense, less accountable because they're not big brands who are going to be held up in public for their performance. So it's a bit of both, but I think that we should expect the big kind of companies to lead the way, and that's where, again, that tool such as a kind of a global treaty will help ensure that everyone has to play by the same rules, and that you don't have free riding of these kind of national companies.
How far are we with this global treaty, John? When do you expect it to be signed finally? Something like Paris Agreement on plastic, or how does it look like currently?
Exactly, that's a very good analogy. The Paris Agreement for plastic. So the challenge is we're right in the starting blocks, which seems crazy when you consider that we've had 26 years of climate
it doesn't sound good right away.
So we haven't yet agreed to that the world needs a treaty, and that's what's happening at the United Nations Environmental Assembly in February next year. But the signs are good that nations will agree to start negotiating a treaty. Once we've got to that point, those negotiation processes can take quite a long time, between 2 to 10 years, depending on how complex the negotiations are. I think we're hopeful that it won't be that long, and that within 2 to 3 years we could actually have a kind of agreed upon and ratified treaty in place. So 2024, 2025, we could really start to have some of these things cranking up. And that's not to say we need to wait until 2025 to take action on some of these other things, but it's just to kind of, I think this is that treaty helps to lay a foundation upon which other things also can be built.
I mean, it's a bit like pandemic, right? So if it was concerning everyone, then we suddenly can take actions. Why can't we take actions here quicker? It concerns everyone on the planet. So I'm a bit, like always, why? It's so obvious we need to take action.
And it is also coming every time you now read in the news and everything that it has breached our groundwater, it has breached our food. It is in fish, it is in meat. It's coming. It has become a problem for the whole world.
Yeah, I mean, and that it is a challenge. I think the question of why can't we take action? I mean, we are taking action, but
quicker, John, quicker.
Yes. I feel similarly to you, Sveta, but I think that. I mean, the challenge is actually, and this is where I think your audience is really important, because waste management is typically one of a kind of a loss-making area or sector. So how do you finance waste management? At the moment, it's mostly financed from people's taxes. So, which is why developed world countries tend to be, manage their waste better because they collect more taxes and they have more money to, put into this problem. But we won't mention the fact that many of these developed world countries export all of their waste to the developing world as well.
Yes. Yeah. Also, Switzerland does it, by the way,
Yeah.
Yes, Switzerland also exports its waste to other countries in Africa, and so yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that.
But I think that the reality is because all the costs of waste management are all externalized, and it kind of goes back to my point about extended producer responsibility, where the producer is not paying for how you manage the waste of that packaging once the consumer has used it once off, and they kind of walk away with their profits and never have to think about it again. That's changing now, as I think the consumers and governments are becoming more aware of the problem, and expect more accountability from these companies. But I think that the challenge is to develop policies which kind of internalize those externalities, because that's when people say, well, it's actually too expensive for me to put certain products on the market. And that's where I like the world's moving this slowly, but I think you'll know that finance needs kind of a good policy framework in order to kind of invest in the long term, and we're starting to get there, but at the moment the first movers are really guys who are taking chances or moving because of the public pressure, as opposed to kind of a lot of financial opportunity in this space.
Oh, talking about financial, so then we come to the business side of it, is that you mentioned that you're also working at mapping out plastic footprint. How and what do you do, and what are the business opportunities in it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. So, I mean, I think I talked a little bit about plastic footprinting earlier, and that's really, it's kind of a good plastic footprint has two pieces to it. One is, what is a company producing? And then the second part is kind of what's happening to it. And so, to take a very simple example, if you've got a company A that's active only in Switzerland, and it's only producing plastic, like let's say chocolates, and it's you can say, okay, well, it's going to have it's introducing 10 tons of polypropylene packaging every year onto the Swiss market. In Switzerland, the polypropylene doesn't really have a recycling scheme, so that's likely to end up being incinerated. You can have a very clear idea of its footprint. Compare that to a multinational company which is producing chocolates, beverages, chips, everything else, and it's exporting them or even producing them in 100 plus countries around the world. Each of those countries, some will have waste management schemes, some will have recycling schemes, some will have maybe have some form of reuse in operation, some won't have any form of waste management. When you start to put that into the picture and trying to and you have to add it all together to get that company's kind of plastic footprint, that's a much more challenging picture. And that's also understanding that, you start to get an idea of, from a company's perspective, okay, well, where do we invest? If we want to have the biggest bang for our buck, we want to try and solve this problem. Investing in Switzerland right now for waste management is probably not not going to have a really big impact. And that's where investing in a place like Indonesia at the moment might make the most sense. The challenge, though, as I mentioned earlier, investments in waste management, are really difficult to see how at this moment, without good policy frameworks, how you going to make a good return. And that's where the opportunity comes in, because looking at the alternative opportunities here, so upstream is really, I think, where the kind of exciting stuff is happening right now, and this is where actually a lot of investment is flowing. So reuse.
John, are you talking about circular economy here? So if yes, how do you look at it, and what is the angle of your initiative to this topic? Of course, it's very, very closely connected to upstream, I think.
Absolutely. So I mean, sorry, I should have probably clarified. I mean, the circular economy is essentially the foundation of what are kind of the upstream approach is all about. Is ensuring that you cutting off unnecessary plastics, but then everything else needs to circulate. Anything that we say is valuable and we need it in our system, we need to make sure it doesn't leak out of our system, and that's kind of a circular economy. And a true circular economy aims to ensure that you're not kind of downcycling things, so that a bottle doesn't turn into a flower pot, for example, which means we need more virgin material to make another bottle. You want a bottle to turn into another bottle. And ideally, if you can, make it a reusable bottle so that it doesn't have to be remade in between each use, then you can also like reduce your carbon footprint and further kind of virgin inputs to the system. So that's the kind of circular economy that we need to be working on, and that's where I think that, as I said, the investment opportunities are right now. So working, look, refill is one of the big kind of spaces that you're looking at reuse. Recognizing that packaging is one of the biggest contributors to kind of marine plastic pollution. Figuring out how you can create refill systems where consumers can get convenient refills. So Ben, I don't know about how we'd have to think about it in your train example, but it's happening here in Switzerland. You see you've got kind of reusable coffee cups where you get a coffee in it and then actually drop it off at a cleaning point and then get another one later on. And there's a massive, like a mushrooming of initiatives in that space, looking at kind of the coffee cup refill opportunities. There's also, as you will have seen maybe in some of the stores, where you get consumers have the opportunity to bring their own containers and not have to take.
I have a fun example on that. I was yesterday in a shop, and then a guy next to me, he chosen to buy a salad, kind of, and then he had two of them, and he said, well, why is it? It's exactly the same, and one is 5 francs more expensive. And then the shopkeeper said, well, if you bring it back, you get this 5 francs back, so then you don't spend, we reduce waste, right? But the guy said, oh, it's okay. And then he took the option not to pay the 5 francs, right? But unfortunately, because I was like watching, okay, is it working? It's not always working, unfortunately.
But for some people, 5 francs can be a lot of money.
No, he didn't look like a poor guy.
No, I mean that's a good point, Sveta, and I think that's why I said convenient. We have to make it convenient, and it has to work, because if you're expecting consumers to take the kind of more environmentally responsible action when they're not being kind of forced to from a policy perspective, then the challenge is that it has to work for them.
Exactly. And one of the things here, I also think that when I go shopping, I mean, in Switzerland, you have these big food shopping places. Nearly all our vegetables and fruits are packed in plastic. So I know that in one side, it is good because it keeps the food from getting spoiled fast. But on the other hand, a large part of it, or basically nearly all of it, ends up in the waste. So do you see here also a role played by businesses to somehow work on it? And will your initiative from WWF would like to be consulted or be involved in such business ideas?
Absolutely. So I mean, that's where this question of kind of eliminating unnecessary plastic comes in, and trying to determine which parts are unnecessary and which are not is kind of the first challenge. So we're involved in groups of business groups working on this challenge in multiple countries around the world through kind of initiatives called Plastics Pacts, where you've got often government and business and NGOs working together to kind of work out a kind of a roadmap to solving some of these problems. And one of the first challenges they have is to identify what those unnecessary plastics are. And unfortunately, it's more difficult than you would think. So, the common example used is often around cucumbers. So
yeah, I don't understand why they're all wrapped in plastic.
Now he's going to explain it.
My attention is all yours.
Yeah, so I mean, a cucumber that's wrapped will typically have a kind of a lifespan of up to 11 or 12 days in your refrigerator, whereas one that's not wrapped will last 3 to 4 days. And so when you think about environmental impact, you need to consider kind of the overall what went into production of that product as well. And in many products, the footprint of the environmental footprint, 95% of it is generated by the production of that product, and only about 5% is related to the packaging of that product. So getting rid of the plastic on that product because you want to try and make the world a better place, you could be fixing the 5%, but making the 95% far worse. And I think that's the challenge of trying to figure out where we need to intervene. But I mean, by the same token, Ben, when you walk into the shop and you see a plastic product wrapped in plastic, wrapped in more plastic with another piece of plastic, that's where you say, well, gee, something's definitely gone wrong
but
here.
John, do you know what? There's another issue in here, because the freshness or nutritions are from vegetables and fruits, you're losing every day. So the longer you keep it not fresh, right, so the nutritions inside are also decreasing. So keeping it 11 days, at the end, I don't know exactly how much percentage you still have, but then the tomato doesn't smell like tomato, doesn't taste like tomato anymore, especially in winter. So is it worth it at all to keep it so long then? Because you know what I mean? I'm from a farm. I grew up in the village, so for me, tomato must smell a tomato. Otherwise, I don't eat it at all.
Now John is regretting that he came to the TV show.
No, I think it's a valid question. I think it's a complex answer though, always, because I think I would first prize is to buy locally. Buy regional things that are not transported long distance and are not heavily packaged, and use it, and you can use it tomorrow. You don't have to store it for a week. But often that's a privilege that not everyone has, and I think you can look at many of the products that are arriving on in the developing world context, where they just do not have access. They don't have the cold chain supply chains that can actually deliver a product within days of it being picked, kind of thing. So I think yes, if you can, is the answer. But to many people, their options are much more prescribed, and in that case, having something which is nutritious and partially nutritious is better than having something that's not edible at all.
You're absolutely right, John. Of course, I understand this problem as well, but I just want to maybe reach out to those who can do that and still not doing it, right? So it's always, if you can do it, then at least do it if you can, right?
Exactly.
So, but
and I think Ben's point was up front in the show was to say that the developed world are actually producing more plastic waste or more waste in general than the developing world. And that's to your point. Actually, the first place to start is just use less.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's what we also do. One another point is that a couple of weeks back we had another guest, and she mentioned, because she's in textile, and she mentioned that every time we wash our clothes, we are releasing enormous amounts of microplastics in the ocean. And this is the plastic which we do not see. So we have this large plastic floating islands on the top of the ocean, as is visible, or we see them dumped in the lakes in Asia and Africa, which you are speaking about, which you also showed in the picture. But how do you look into microplastics, and which also the so-called developed world is also dumping into the ocean?
Yeah, microplastics is one of those kind of even newer than the kind of idea of, or the concept or concerns around plastics is this kind of realization that we have this issue of microplastics, and the sources of microplastics are really diverse. So you mentioned washing coming from clothes to polyester, those kind of fabrics, but it's much broader than that. And actually, one of the biggest contributors to microplastics is from tires. So wear on tires on the roads. And I think that when you start to think about how you can address that kind of a problem, it's really challenging. And I think, though, without causing too much alarm, although obviously microplastics have been found everywhere, from the top of Everest to the bottom of the ocean to inside animals and even humans. We don't yet have a really good idea of the impact of these microplastics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that we should not worry about it. But I think what at this point in time, we're still trying to figure out what those impacts are. But what we do know is that a large percentage of microplastics also come from macroplastics, the bigger plastics that have been broken down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes,
and,
right.
and in terms of volume and weight, 98% of the plastics in the ocean, for example, are still big ones. So that's where our opportunity is to really grapple with the things that we can actually kind of collect and make an impact on, and so reduce the chances of them becoming microplastics. The solutions to microplastics, I think, are going to be even more interesting. And I know there's some research looking into kind of installing filters on washing machines, for example.
Yeah.
But I don't think yet we've got an answer to the question
Yeah.
around tires and how we address that.
I was very funnily reading this article a few days back. It was in a science journal about, you must be knowing it, the mystery of the missing plastic, because apparently they have calculated how much plastic is entering the ocean, but we can only find 3% of it, and somehow they can't find 97%. So they think that it has been broken by the weather, by the water, by the animals, and broken into tiny pieces and dissolved somewhere down deep in the ocean. So they call it the mystery of the missing plastics. You must be aware of it.
Mm-hmm. John, I wanted to continue our discussion on externalities, because you've been speaking on this, I think, more than a decade, on how fossil fuel pricing should be included, like the externalities of it, like damage to the environment, transport, or dangerous gas releases, etc., and also adding prices of water, land, and food use to feed the cattle in the prices of meat. What do you think of using the same technique of including the prices of externalities like recycling, water energy used for production, the impact on climate change, cleaning the oceans, into the price of plastic?
It's a great idea.
Yay! How do we implement that?
So that, I mean, and that is happening. Even, I mean, in Europe, you have a number of what we call these extended producer responsibility, or EPR schemes, where companies do have to pay a fee for every, per ton of different materials that they put onto the market. And that fee goes towards waste management of those different materials. And in a perfect world, it's not often the case, but in theory, you can change that fee according to how hard each material is to recycle. So a very difficult to recycle material would have a very high fee associated with it, which obviously encourages the businesses to shift away from that material. And that those extended producer responsibility schemes, where producers are actually expected to pay a fee for every ton of material that they put onto the market, and those fees can be increased or decreased depending on how difficult it is to manage those different materials. That obviously incentivizes companies to move away from the expensive materials and towards materials that don't attract a fee. So that's the kind of the externality cost is essentially in that fee, and that's what's happening. You see many of these schemes are operating in Europe. Some of them are starting to happen in North America, and to some extent in some African countries. South Africa is one of got a few of these schemes. But the important piece here is that you need to have not just voluntary schemes. You need to actually have mandated schemes, so that everyone has to contribute, and not just a few of the kind of well-recognized companies.
Right.
And so having the policy to support it, and then the mechanisms to collect the fees and use those fees for the right purposes are really important to making those systems work.
And you also mentioned about the waste management is one of the real ways to handle this. But unfortunately, waste management does not sound very sexy for investors. So how do you think that investors can make a return on it? Or have you also thought about it, the ways in which it can be profitable for investors to get involved?
Yeah, I think that, as I mentioned earlier, upstream investments are the sexy ones, the reuse schemes, and finding like alternative materials that are more responsible or more sustainable than plastic. That's where a lot of investment and interest is going at the moment, and we're happy to see that happening. I think when it comes to kind of waste management, a lot of the investment to date is going into recycling or new recycling alternative technologies kind of thing, which is often challenging if it's not happening in a place where you've got a kind of the whole, where you've got control over the whole system. So you need to make sure that you've got a good stream of waste coming in order to make a financial return on your plant. I think making waste management sexy is a challenge for a campaigns company.
Yeah.
But I think recycling is probably the key piece at this point in time. And like ultimately, landfill management and those kind of things, I think are likely to continue to be probably the realm of kind of government's responsibilities, and unfortunately something that the taxpayer is going to have to continue to foot until we find a way to kind of increase accountability upstream.
And John, many investors are watching our TV show. Could you name a few examples of concrete waste management projects which are right now available to finance? Because some investors are also very much concerned about this topic and issue, and maybe you can help some projects to get financed.
Sure. I mean, I think there's an excellent guide that I would suggest to investors to look at. It's called the Reuse. It's a report by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which covers, I think, about 200 different innovations in the reuse space. And not all of them are necessarily looking for financing. Some of them have got great investors, but I think there are a lot of interesting companies there which are showing the way. One of the ones that I always enjoy is a company called Algramo, which is based in Chile, and it's a refill solution where they're offering at this point in time, like detergents and washing powder in a refill in an electric tricycle that moves around the suburbs, and people come out with their own containers and can buy directly from the tricycle, and they've got some really cool kind of tricks built into it, to how you can easily pay for it and all of that. But the challenge has been historically is that those products were sold in sachets in very small volumes, and so you had a lot of packaging per kilogram of product, and the price was really high. And that's unfortunately these lower income consumers couldn't afford to buy in bulk. So now it's kind of unlocking two problems here. You're reducing the amount of packaging required, and you're making it cheaper because they're not having to pay for that packaging, and they can now start buying in bulk. And so Algramo is the Chilean example, but there are quite a few other examples like that around the world. Another one kind of a bit closer to home in Europe is the Recup, which is around using coffee cups, kind of it's almost like
I know them. Yeah, they're cool.
Okay. Like a membership scheme for coffee cups, where you can get a clean cup every time you walk into the store, and then bring back an old cup that you've used, and they will clean it and hand it on to someone else. So those are some of the kind of interesting things. There's also investment in the space of alternative materials. So looking at things like seaweed to replace some kind of applications of plastic. Maybe just a caution on that is that you have to make sure that there's a lot of interest in this kind of space of biodegradable plastics at the moment, but a lot of the promise has not been delivered on, and many of these kind of biodegradable plastics don't actually biodegrade in the ocean. So when investing in those spaces, you really need to ensure that you've actually got a product which does what it should. And then when you come to I think waste management, like practical examples of investment in waste management, that as I said is challenging, and most of the investment that I've seen is going into new forms of recycling. So looking at what they call chemical recycling, where you're breaking down plastic back down into its kind of original monomers so that you can basically recreate virgin plastic. But also has challenges associated with it because it requires a lot of energy,
Yeah,
and can
Mhm.
create
I
some
thought
other
the same. Yeah,
Right.
toxins. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Oh, we are running out of time because we wanted to also speak a little bit about the city development, but we don't have much time left. But can you say a little bit about what your initiative is doing on city development?
Yeah, sure. So, as I said, I think at the beginning, one of the key kind of focus areas for WWF is at a city level, because this is recognizing that waste management is typically managed at a city level. So, national governments can create policy, but the people who are actually responsible for collecting the the fees and the actual waste are typically kind of municipalities. And municipalities often it happens behind the scenes and people don't really think enough about it. So the challenge there is really bringing in multiple actors to understand how we can have a holistic system-wide approach. We're working through the plastic smart cities approach with 25 pilot cities in Southeast Asia. So in
25.
Indonesia.
25 pilot cities. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, there are over 10,000 cities around the world. So we what we want to do
That puts it.
is
I know, but we
we
need to
need to
start
produce a
somewhere, right?
model. Yeah,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that's it. It's really a pilot. Is the goal is to show what is possible, and so we're working in Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and China to try and work. If we can get it right in some of those areas, then I think there's real hope that we can scale that both across Southeast Asia, but the rest of the world. And and that's a holistic approach, saying actually, well, let's first understand what the problem is. Let's map the problem, and then not leave it all to the municipality to solve. Bring in corporates where can they actually address it? Where can we actually eliminate plastics to start with? And all of this hopefully from a science-based perspective, because often
Yeah.
it's you only start thinking about it once the waste is created. And if you start a little bit higher up and say, well, actually, what could we how we could reduce, like an organic waste is actually, to come back to your question earlier, Sveta,
Yeah.
Thank
investing
you,
in
John.
organic waste is really interesting, because if you can like in place like China, 60% of the waste stream is made up of organic waste.
Hmm.
And there's actually are financial opportunities around organic waste for fertilizer and biogas,
Yes.
all of these things.
Biogas.
And if you can get that organic waste out of the waste stream, that means that you like halve the waste stream, but you also make sure that the remaining waste stream is more recyclable because it's not contaminated. So you can
Hmm.
increase recycling levels of the plastics in the waste stream, and you can halve the amount of waste that you actually have to deal with. So that's a real opportunity, which I think, particularly in the developing world, we need to be looking into much more.
Wow, John, we are really running out of time now, but of course, we have always time for a call to action. Would you share something for our global audience? What is a call to action from your side?
Well, I think you've shared it already, Sveta, but the biggest thing is where we sit right now. We have this global treaty or discussions around a global treaty happening, and we need to increase accountability of companies and countries for the plastic pollution problem. And as both as consumers or individual citizens, and as owners of companies or investors in companies, the best thing we can do is create that foundation, that treaty that governs how what the rules of the game are, and to make sure that we're all playing by the same rules. So in WWF we have a number of ways in which individuals can support. There's a petition that we have over two and a bit million people have signed, calling for the treaty. There is a manifesto of over 90 different businesses around the world who are calling for that treaty, including some of the big names like Coca-Cola and Nestle and Unilever. And that also includes, I think, over $5 trillion of assets under management from the different financial institutions that are supporting it. So, I would really encourage anyone who's interested to get involved in those initiatives, making sure that any decision makers of are aware that you are supportive of a global treaty, and that come February next year we really do get the mandate to start negotiating that treaty, because without that we're going to continue with the kind of current trends.
John, please make sure you send us a link for this treaty, and then we will also publish it so everyone who wants can.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that.
I was quicker.
and would also these informations be available on the WWF website?
Yes. You should be able to find it on our website, but I'll also make sure you guys get the links so you can share them with your audiences.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for coming today to our show. It was amazing, very amazing insights shared. And we're looking forward to hear more in the next year or years about the development.
No, we are calling him on February to find out whether he got it through or not.
Yeah, so am I. Thanks for the opportunity. It's great.
John, please register on Chamomile as a little present. You will get upgraded membership. Just register and let us know. We will provide you a coupon to do that.
Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Thank you, John, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Dear viewers, with this, our show of today, the 12th episode of Season 3, ends. And if you liked it, please subscribe or on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/SwissImpact.
And next week, it's going to be amazing because there's an event taking place in Geneva. It's called the Building Bridges event, where the complete financial world, the political world, NGOs and United Nations is coming together to discuss about implementation of SDGs and how we are going to finance SDGs. So we will be there and we will be reporting. I'll be speaking there a couple of times, and we will do a complete reporting next week about what happened in Geneva.
Yeah, so don't miss it. Subscribe and also check Chamomile if you want to learn with us. For now, thank you and act for your future.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Welcome to Season 3 of Swiss Impact with Banerjis. I'm Sveta.
And I'm Ben.
The topic of Season 3 is Impact Investing, the new normal. Do you also want to do something meaningful for our planet and people, or invest with impact?
Then our amazing and powerful guests who are business owners, heads of financial institutions, thought leaders, political leaders, policymakers, investors, and experts.
Greetings, my name is Ash Bachori, and I'm the senior mentor of the POP or Protect Our Planet movement, and also a member of the board and secretary-treasurer of the World Sustainable Development Forum. Our primary goal is to mobilize the 1.8 billion youth of the world to urgently address the issue of climate change and take action to protect our planet.
This will inspire you to get engaged.
And in this season, we will challenge them even more to take actions towards sustainable development goals to enable paradigm shift in the financial sector and way of doing business.
Watch and learn how can we, as humans, transform into eco-financial system which would serve all people and the environment.
We aim for impact investment to become available to anyone, become truly mainstream.
See you every Friday at 3 p.m. Central European Time at Swiss Impact with Banerjee.
Act for your future.